Good afternoon, my name's Ryan Willard and I am an architect from the Thinking Hands studio, and today I am here in the heart of the Waldrons Conservation Area, which is located in South London in Croydon, and it's got me thinking actually about, I'm dealing with a lot of clients at the moment, we're going through planning permission, and I wanted to draw to your attention some of the most common mistakes people make whilst going through planning. And these can be very expensive mistakes, they can really slow down the process, and it's often, people try and do this when they don't use a design professional or a planning consultant, and a lot of DIY people, self-builders, will run into these pitfalls if they've not been properly informed about how the planning procedure works and how best to navigate your way through it. So the first mistake people make is not using the pre-application process, which the council offers, often for a price similar to what a full planning submission will cost you. But the benefit of using a pre-application process is it's almost like you're soundboarding the ideas off the local authority, and it gives them a chance to participate in the conversation about your development, about your extension or whatever it is that you're doing, and it gives them an opportunity to give you a likelihood of that proposal gaining planning permission. And it also gives you, most importantly, the opportunity to be able to respond to their comments. So what I often see people do is they go straight, and they want to save themselves 130 quid or 180 quid or whatever it is, depending on your local authority. They want to go straight into planning. They get what they want, all drawn up by a design and build team or whatever, and they go straight into planning, and boom, it gets rejected immediately. And then you either have the choice of going through months of painful appeals, and you can't even change the design. However, if you go through a pre-application process, the councils used to do this for free in some areas, but now, as I say, you had to pay for it. What this is you often get a letter. It takes about 21 days. Once you've submitted your drawing proposal to the council, you'll get a letter from them, and they will kind of evaluate it against all their local planning policy, and they will tell you the likelihood of whether your proposal will get planning permission or not. And if they say it's unlikely to get planning permission, they will often give you reasons for why they think it won't get permission, and that gives you the opportunity to refine your drawings, go back to your architect or the designers that you're working with, and get them to change it in accordance to what the planning officer's recommendations are, and that will increase your likelihood of getting a full planning permission without any hassle. And it really does, it might cost you a couple of extra 100 quid, but it will save you in the long run. It will save you months of time, and also it builds up a good relationship with the local council. So tip number one is use the pre-application process. Mistake number two that I see people doing a hell of a lot is, and particularly builders will want to do this because they don't want to go through the planning application process because it's too much hassle for them. It means they've got to hire out someone to do the CAD drawings for them. But for you as the consumer, for you as the person who's doing the work to their house or to their property, to try and always use permitted development is not an ideal situation. Now, lots of, as I say, lots of people will try and guide you and say permitted development is better, you want to avoid planning permission, it's a hassle. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. In fact, using planning permission and going for a full planning submission will give you more freedom to have exactly what it is that you want, rather than trying to squeeze in what you want and what your building requires into the constraints of the permitted development criteria, which often means it's a very small extension that you can do. You're restricted in terms of how far back you can go, you're restricted in terms of the height, you're restricted with all these dimensions. It's like literally you're squeezing what you want into a predefined box set out by a local authority. Whereas in many cases, actually going for planning permission is absolutely fine. There's no problem with it. It's an easy enough process to go through if you're working with someone who knows what they're talking about and and you're working with someone who's competent as a designer and knows how to negotiate and speak with the planners. Planning permission actually gives you the freedom to have exactly what it is that you like, and it bring in vastly more value to your assets and your long-term investment in your property. So avoiding planning permission, not a good idea. Permit development, yes, you can use it in some circumstances. Sometimes it can be of use, but if it doesn't fit the criteria for what you want, I would always suggest having a look. Do not try and avoid planning permission all the time. And it's also worth noting that in conservation areas, people don't realise this, there is no permitted development. Or if you're extending a flat rather than a house, there is no permitted development. You can't do permitted development proposals. They don't exist. You have to get a full planning permission. Talking about permitted development, I often see people, when they do go down the permitted development route, they totally ignore the fact that you require a certificate of lawful development, which is essentially a letter, a formal letter from the council, from your local authority, stating that you do not require full planning permission for the proposal that you are making. Now, you can get away with not having it. You can get them retrospectively. I don't advise doing that. I always suggest treating it like you're doing a planning submission, and that you send your proposals to the council and get them to send you a certificate lawful of development. Go through the application process to do that before you start any building work. There, you have been warned. I recommend that's what you always do. And it's interesting because people can get away with not doing a CLD, and they'll go, a builder will say, let's go and do it, we don't need planning permission, and you'll get something built under permitted development and people will get it built. And then when it comes to selling the house, they don't have a certificate of lawful development, and that will easily prevent a sale going through altogether. There is no documented evidence that what the extension is permitted, and it will slow down the sale of your house, and if not, devalue it. So always use a certificate of lawful development if you do choose to go down the permitted development route. Another common mistake I see people doing when they're involved with planning applications, A, is trying to do it themselves, and B, actually having no idea of the constraints that exist in the location where they are actually trying to put towards a planning submission. So things to look out for are things like conservation areas. For example, where I'm standing now is a conservation area, and it's really interesting to understand why it is a conservation area, so that when you're making your proposals, you can design in accordance to and sensitively to why the area is a conservation area. So here we're on the Waldrons estate. There are lots of different buildings behind me, these old manor houses, these neo-Georgian Victorian properties, some of them in old Gothic styles and neo-Gothic style, and they're all buildings of architectural and historic character, which are deemed important to preserve. And anything that we build or design needs to enhance the local area, enhance what is around. So by not knowing that you're in a conservation area, you end up designing something which is totally out of keeping, and if you don't know you're in a conservation area, you might try and go straight into permit development and you'll just get rejected, and just wastes loads and loads of time. Other things to look out for: Article 4s, Article 4 directions, which can be, blanket bans on roof extensions, or a blanket ban. I've worked places where we're not allowed to do anything on the front of the facades in various MISUSE areas in London. So knowing Article 4s is very important. You might have other constraints. These are more, you won't really affect you for small domestic projects, but obviously things like air height restrictions, or there's all sorts of different constraints and conservation areas to be explored and understand when you're doing any type of planning. Another important, and for me probably the most important aspect of doing any planning submission, is a high level and a high quality of design. And this can often be negated by people when they're doing their planning permissions. They will try and cut costs with using architects or using good designers. But going through planning permission is like you're constructing a legal argument. You're putting forward a reasoned argument which is part of your design for why the building must look like this and why it is sensitive and enhances the local area, and as such is contextual. And architects tend to be very good at creating creating and structuring those kinds of stories, as opposed to like, you know, just if you're using CAD services or somebody who hasn't got that kind of ability, that design ability, you know, you end up just ploughing forward without any understanding of what the planners are actually looking for and how to create a building which is sensitive and in keeping with the local context. And that's what the planners are really looking for. They want to see buildings that are adhering to local context, adhering to local planning policy, and a good level of design will do that. You often will hear, and I've seen this before, lots of companies that will specialize. They say they specialize in planning procedure and they've got detailed understanding of local planning context and law. Fine, that's all great, but without good design, you're not going to get anything done. And the planning departments can be, you know, they're much more, they're aware of what good design is. They used to be a lot more aware. We used to have a thing called CABE, particularly on bigger developments and projects. CABE was a sort of like a kind of a buffer between the designers, architects, clients, developers, and the planning departments, which would oversee projects, have a kind of architectural design crit for a project to ensure that high levels of design were adhered to. And it would often have a panel of design professionals, other architects, kind of commenting and making sure that proposals were of a high standard. So design, I really think, is under utilized, and people don't realize how important it is when getting planning permission. A good designer will be their you know, absolutely invaluable asset to your project and development and getting them through planning permission. So that's all from me. I hope that's been useful to you. Leave comments and please subscribe, and there'll be plenty more of these videos shortly.